Crowds of the curious are held back at a respectful distance from the private funeral that Joe DiMaggio and others arranged for Marilyn Monroe. After services in the chapel of Westwood Memorial Cemetery, in which eulogies and passages from the scripture were read, the casket is placed in the hearse to be taken to a crypt on the nearby corridor of memories. Only her half-sister, studio workers, and close friends of the late actress, among whom none were closer than DiMaggio and his young son, attend the services, which thereby have a dignity and simplicity denied many Hollywood rites. Final prayers are offered at the crypt. DiMaggio is strongly affected as he and the other handful of mourners depart and leave the earthly remains of Marilyn Monroe.
At the time, people saw it as emotional vulnerability,
loneliness.
but when she died at just 36, those words didn't feel like sadness anymore. They felt like a quiet awareness, something she carried long before anyone else noticed. And then there's James Dean, a symbol of rebellion and youth. Just days before his fatal car crash, James made a comment that would later echo through Hollywood history. While talking about fast cars, he reportedly said something along the lines of, "I have a feeling I won't live very long." It sounded like the kind of dramatic statement people often dismiss, but within days, he was gone. A rising star cut off before his career had even fully begun. And suddenly, that sentence didn't sound dramatic anymore. It sounded accurate. Next is Heath Ledger, whose transformation into complex roles became legendary. During the filming of intense characters, Heath spoke openly about how deeply those roles affected him. He described sleepless nights, a mind that wouldn't shut off, and a constant pressure that followed him even when the cameras stopped rolling. In one moment, he casually mentioned how his lifestyle could end up harming him. It sounded like honesty, like vulnerability. But after his sudden death, those words became something much heavier. Because they weren't just reflections, they were signals that something wasn't right. And then we have Paul Walker. Known for his love of cars both on and off screen, Paul often spoke about speed, not just the thrill, but the danger. In interviews, he acknowledged how quickly things can go wrong, how life can change in a single second when you're moving too fast. It felt like awareness, like respect for risk. But when he died in a high-speed car crash, those words became almost haunting. Because sometimes what feels like general knowledge becomes deeply personal in hindsight. And then there's Amy Winehouse. Her life was filled with talent, fame, and struggle, all visible to the public. But what stood out most were the moments where she seemed to accept a certain fate. In interviews, Amy spoke about not wanting to live a long life, about burning bright rather than fading slowly. It sounded like artistic expression, but after her death at 27, those statements took on a completely different meaning. They didn't feel poetic anymore. They felt real, almost like she had already come to terms with something others refused to see. Then comes Bruce Lee, a figure known not just for his physical ability, but for his philosophy. Bruce often spoke about life in a way that acknowledged its unpredictability. He believed in control, discipline, awareness, but he also understood that life doesn't always follow rules. In one reflection, he spoke about how even the strongest individuals are not immune to sudden endings. It wasn't fear, it was understanding. And when he died unexpectedly at a young age, that understanding felt less like philosophy and more like insight. And finally, we come to Tupac Shakur. Unlike others, Tupac didn't hint at death. He spoke about it directly. In interviews, lyrics, and conversations, he repeatedly expressed the belief that he wouldn't live long. He talked about violence, fame, and the environment around him, about feeling like he was living on borrowed time. Many saw it as intensity, as part of his persona, but when he was killed at just 25, those words became impossible to ignore, because they weren't just expressions, they were acknowledgments. But the pattern doesn't end there, because when you look closer, you begin to notice something even more unsettling. These weren't just random statements scattered across time. Many of them came during moments of exhaustion, isolation, or emotional intensity, times when these individuals were closest to their real thoughts, away from scripts, away from cameras, away from expectations. And that raises a deeper question. Were these predictions, or were they moments of clarity? Because living at that level of fame means living under constant pressure, Expectations from fans, studios, media. It creates an environment where every decision carries weight. And over time, that pressure builds. It changes how you think, how you see the future. It can make risks feel normal and consequences feel distant, until suddenly they're not. And maybe that's what we're really seeing here. Not supernatural foresight, but heightened awareness, a sense of direction, a recognition of patterns in their own lives that others couldn't fully see. Because when you're inside that world, you feel things differently. You notice the cracks before they become visible. You understand the trajectory, even if you can't change it. And sometimes that understanding comes out in words. Words that sound casual, words that feel emotional, words that people dismiss, until later when those words become something much more powerful. But beyond these 7, there are countless smaller moments scattered across Hollywood history. Interviews, diary entries, offhand comments, where stars hinted at exhaustion, fear, or a sense of something ending. And most of the time, those moments are ignored because they don't fit the image people want to believe. We see celebrities as larger than life, untouchable, protected by their success. But the reality is often the opposite. The higher the visibility, the greater the pressure. The louder the applause, the deeper the silence when it fades. And in that silence, people start to confront things they can't escape. And maybe that's why these statements happen. Not because they can see the future, but because they can feel the direction they're heading. Because when your life moves at that speed, constant attention, constant expectation, you start to notice patterns. You start to recognize when things are unsustainable. And even if you don't say it directly, it comes out in fragments, in jokes, in interviews, in quiet moments that don't seem important at the time, until later when those fragments form a pattern that's impossible to ignore. And that brings us back to the central question: were these predictions, or were they warnings, signals of awareness that no one around them fully understood? Because if there's one thing these stories reveal, it's that sometimes the most important truths are spoken quietly, not announced, not emphasized, just mentioned and then forgotten, until hindsight turns them into something much more powerful. And maybe the most unsettling part of all is realizing how often these moments still happen today. How often people express something deeper and it's dismissed as emotion, stress, or exaggeration. Because it's easier to ignore it, easier to assume everything will be fine. But what if it's not? What if in some cases people really do understand the path they're on long before anyone else sees it? And if that's true, then these stories aren't just about Hollywood. They're about awareness, about listening, about paying attention to the things that don't seem important until they are. Because sometimes the signs are there, quiet, subtle, easy to overlook, until they become impossible to ignore. And by then, it's already too late.